All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Mindgasms. I'm going to do a Mindgasms vlog today on the book The History of Sexuality Part 1 by Michel Foucault. He did what is called historiography in many of his books that are often put into the category of philosophy, but they're kind of really more like history. Anyway, historiography is basically the history of ideas, concepts, and perspectives. In Discipline and Punish, which I made a video about a while ago, I'll add a link for that somewhere in the video and in the description for this one. Foucault writes about the history of cultural attitudes and behavior toward criminals. In Madness and Civilization, which I will make a video or write a blog about later, Foucault talks about the history of cultural attitudes and behavior toward people with mental disorders. In all of the handful or so of his books that I've read, Foucault seems to analyze how these cultural attitudes have changed from approximately the 1600s to the 1800s and through to today. He also uses a multifactorial analysis. He explains the contributing causes that led to the behaviors and attitudes changing from many different angles. There are many reasons that attitudes towards certain groups of people and behaviors change throughout history. The same is true of the History of Sexuality Part 1, that he uses that historiography method in it. Foucault explains what cultural conceptions of sex were around during the medieval or the Victorian times in the 1500s or so, maybe the 1600s. He elaborates on the various factors that contributed to those cultural conceptions and how they changed through the 1600s, 1700s, and 1800s. There are many strong remnants of these worldviews on sex that have been embedded in our culture since then. Foucault starts off the book by writing about how Victorian perspectives on sexuality have permeated our culture for hundreds of years. Here's a quote. Thus, the image of the imperial prude is emblazoned on our restrained, mute, and hypocritical sexuality. I think that's so fucking true. Since we're encouraged to have the attitudes of imperial prudes, many of us restrain our conversation and expression about sex. This is because sexuality is seen as unnatural sin and morally corrupt. Obviously, not everyone explicitly or even implicitly believes this, but countless people don't talk about sex or hardly ever do because it's seen as too dirty for polite conversation. It's seen as strange to openly appreciate sex, too, since people pretend that this is not a natural thing and that it's not normal behavior that everyone does. Muting our sexuality can lead us to being hypocritical about it. Most of us have heard stories about homophobic evangelical Christians who've been caught having gay sex. That's always hilarious to me. Restraining gay sexuality in our culture keeps people in the closet. Monogamy is another important cultural construct in our modern era. It's seen as good to be committed to having sex with one person for the rest of your life, as it's often seen as bad to just have sex with multiple partners. That's seen as like immoral and wrong by a lot of people. Yet we wonder why married people cheat on each other and get divorced so often. An interesting point that Foucault makes in the book is this. He's not interested in explaining how ideas about sexual oppression are mistaken. He's not interested in moralizing and saying that they're wrong. He merely wants them to be discussed along with a wide variety of other perspectives about sex in modern societies since the 17th century. He also writes about how developing a rhetorical language category about sex is what first caused everyone to start talking about it so much. Before then, people didn't care as much about sexual attitudes and behaviors because there weren't words like homosexual or heterosexual. It was just behaviors. As Foucault says in this quote, sex, be it refined or rustic, had to be put into words. Foucault also says that it's not the case that people stopped talking about sex. It's that we started discussing it incessantly in order to demonize it and discourage people from expressing themselves sexually or expressing their sexuality. Here's how Foucault puts it. What is peculiar to modern societies, in fact, is not that they consigned sex to a shadow existence, but that they dedicated themselves to speaking of it ad infinitum while exploiting it as the secret. He next explains that the 1800s was not an age of reductionism. It was an age of multiplication. Various new sexual categories were created, and people solidified their sexual identities with specific characteristics. With this increased sexual diversity came multiple quote-unquote perversions. Regular sexual behaviors and conceptions became fetishes. I think this part of the book is so fascinating because it's yet another way that critics of postmodernism are wrong about the views of Foucault. He's not saying that sexual diversity is part of postmodernism and that these multiple categories are good and righteous. He never even used the word postmodernism, actually. He's claiming that these distinct categories are a product of the modern era and that this classification leads to more sexual repression. He doesn't advocate for or moralize about anything. The way he explains this points more towards sexual diversity the way we think about it today as a problem than a virtue. But like I said, he doesn't make a moral claim one way or the other. Before these specific sexual identities that people began to have, there was more sexual freedom. People could experiment sexually and talk about it without being plastered with one particular label that you can never escape. Certain aspects of sexuality that were considered normal before were all of a sudden labeled as unnatural. This is the way Foucault explained it. The setting apart of the quote-unquote unnatural as a specific dimension in the field of sexuality. Before, sexual behavior wasn't considered unnatural, like certain types of it are natural, certain other types are unnatural. Also, pleasure and power became connected. Pleasure was derived from the power that demanded it. Power latched on to the pleasure it unveiled. Foucault writes about how the 19th century bourgeois society was openly perverse in a confused way. They were perverted but unsure of how to apply these labels and confused about their sexual identities. Here's a quote. 19th century quote-unquote bourgeois society, and it is doubtless still with us, was a society of blatant and fragmented perversion. Sounds kind of like today, doesn't it? Foucault disagrees with the argument that industrial societies led to sexual repression, so he disagrees with certain other intellectuals throughout history about that theory. What actually happened is that copious new, distinct, and unusual categories were created in our culture than ever before. Different behaviors have been labeled as different types of people rather than just free exploration of sexuality and different behaviors. There are now more mechanisms of power than ever before that focus their attention on sexuality. There have never been more circular connections explaining specific cultural attitudes towards sex. There are more interconnections between intense pleasure and persistency of power than ever before. All the varieties of sexual behavior have been labeled as specific types of pleasure, and those who seek and practice these have been given distinct, solid, and unchanging sexual identities. All right, so this is where I'm going to stop for now. I'm probably going to do 2 more videos on this book because I marked so many pages when I was reading it. I hope you all find Foucault's analysis on how cultural attitudes towards sex have changed throughout history to be as fascinating as I think it is. Thanks so much to everyone for watching this Mindgasms vlog. And thanks so much to everyone who likes, shares, comments on this video, and subscribes to my channel. Also, thanks so fucking much to anyone who subscribes to me on Patreon and those of you who already have done so. That all really helps me out a lot, and you have no idea how much I appreciate it. So, like I always say, I love you all. Keep being the tiny beam of light that shines through the almost impenetrable darkness in the universe. And most importantly, always remember this: the funk cures all. All right, everyone. Keep having mindgasms and spreading your mindgasms all over the place. Adios until next time.